The next is our second and final reading of the proposed 2014-15 general fund budget. Mr. Gant.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion that this board approve the administration's recommendation for approval of the second and final reading of the 2014-15 general fund budget in the amount of $163,356,921, and that the general fund operating millage be set at 235.8 mils for fiscal year 2014-2015.
Is there, Mr. White?
I'd like to second that motion.
Okay. And Ms. Stowers, okay, thank you. All right, I'll open the floor up for discussion. Mr. Turner.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make an amendment to that motion. The amendment to read that the motion to amend the original motion to approve the budget without a millage increase, thereby absorbing any deficiency with the use of our general fund balance. In addition, by approving the amendment, the board hereby instructs the administration to begin and complete over the next 9 months a study, the objective of which is to reduce district expenses by at least 1.5% of the proposed budget, while maintaining the quality of success for which District 5 is known.
Mr. Turner, just the action part, can you read what your motion is, not the explanation, just the action part?
Well, the motion for action is really two-part. One is to approve the budget without a millage increase to absorb the deficit in our general fund.
Right.
And the second is an action on behalf of the board to instruct the administration, because it's a two-edged, it's not a two-edged sword, but it's.
I just wanted to make sure I had the action. I didn't need that.
I'm sorry. Okay.
No, that's fine. Thank
Okay.
you. Just to make sure we understood. Is there a second to his motion? Ms. Baumgardner seconds. Okay, I'll open the floor up for discussion.
Thank you, ma'am. We've talked about over the years the problem that we're put in. Mr. White always does a very good job of explaining the position we're in with Act 388. This particular year, our district has taken, I'll use the word a hit, if you will. We've lost revenue that we would have anticipated. Unfortunately, a lot of that news came to us late. No fault of Mr. Richardson, but it's the way our legislature debates budgets and so forth. But I think that for us to not consider other action other than just a millage increase would be the wrong thing. Over the past 4 years, since 2010, we've been able to increase our fund balance by over $8 million. It puts us in a good position. It keeps us from having to deal, as others may have to, with Act 388 in a negative way. But I think that we've got to look at where we are and where we're going with our expenses. And it's a difficult task. It's not an easy task. But in addition, and it sort of flies in the face of my motion, because in addition to this particular shortfall, Mr. Richardson pointed out to us at the last board meeting that just to open the new middle school would increase our cost by $2.3 million. That's on top of where we are. If we're faced with the same millage increase next year at 1.5, or a millage increase that results in an increase of 1.5, we're not covering that. We're not covering it this year either. We're $600,000 short if the numbers prove to be to the penny. So with one without the other, I wouldn't want us to do that. I wouldn't want us to just say, let's increase millage, and let's not force ourselves to look at the other side of the equation, which are the expenses. And that's never an easy task, but I think it's something that we owe it to the taxpayers. If I look at it that way, through tax revenue and other revenue, we've increased our fund balance over the last 3 or 4 years by this $8 million. That's money that the taxpayers gave us over and above, or that we received from taxpayers over and above what we needed to meet our expenses. So by putting this back, absorbing this current shortfall in that, we're using excess funds that we've been able to collect. So that's why I made my motion two-part. One, to absorb this increase with the millage through fund balance, and then to instruct the administration to look at, and I just used the 1.5 because on a budget our size, this particular increase represents a 1.3% increase of our current budget. So a 1.5% increase on our budget would generate almost $2.5 million in savings. And where we might not have, and I think this is an accurate statement, but if we miss the millage increase of $1.5 million and we generate that 1.5 as a result of that millage increase over the next 10 years, that's $15 million worth of revenue that we would not get. But on the other hand, I think if we are able to cut $2 million out of our expenses that are recurring expenses, and we deal with that over 10 years, that could be equivalent of a $20 million savings, because we would save that $2 million every year. So I think it's a two-part equation, raising millage without doing something about expense control. I would not be in favor of doing that. So I think we can easily absorb it, and that would be my recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Mr. White?
Lynn, I know you've only been here a short time, but have you got any idea, just, I'm asking you just to guess, but on average, what the expenses go up, and I'm just, we've had several CFOs since I've been here, and somewhere around 6 or 7% is a percentage that I remember from Dan Chandler in the past about how much our expenses increase on average if we don't do anything. I mean, if we just completely stand still on what we have. I mean, do you have any approximate percentage?
Well, back in the days of Dan Chandler, things were growing a little bit faster. We were getting a little bit more money back then. But, I mean, this budget that we've presented to you this year, with outside of a few additional teachers and everything, it's pretty much a status quo budget with just all your built-in increases. And we're still looking at, what, a 1.3% increase in our bottom line now. So, given the fact that if we don't have all of these fringe benefits increases and teachers not getting raises and everything, we can probably stay within that 1 to 1.5%. But when you start adding fringe costs, salary costs, and all that, yes, we could grow anywhere from 5 to 7% easy.
And so you'd say we would grow 5 to 7% on average with the fringe benefit costs? Is that what you're saying?
And with teacher raises, cost of living raises.
Teacher raises, cost. Is that included in the step increase?
No, sir. That's in addition to.
Because I think for the board, I know we have these debates every year, but I think one of the places we're at today is even more precarious than any situation I've ever seen in the past. And I was just sketching numbers here when Jim was talking. I can tell you an easy way to balance our budget every year. There's a $3 million step increase, and unless the General Assembly waives that, do we have a waiver this year?
No.
Okay. There's $3 million. I mean, we always have to confront that number, but that, and I asked Lynn, just on average, let's just say that the average teacher salary is $50,000, maybe a little bit higher than that. we could eliminate 62 teachers every year and not have to, we could balance that step increase by getting rid of 62 teachers. And I'm offering that as an illustration that I think you just suggested we had not done anything new with the exception of 1 or 2 teachers. And just the inescapable conclusion that we get to every year is, I mean, the most important factor of what we do is class size. And as soon as you start scaling that, and we can raise class size forever and balance our budgets. In fact, the years that I've been here, we had tough conversations. It always went to, I mean, I've watched, and I think there's still room to do this. We can ask them to present what they think they would cut. But when it starts going to cutting teachers, then you're immediately, you're conceding that you're getting rid of the quality of what we do. The other thing that's so precarious about where we are today, every time that we, and I'm not any advocate of millage increases, but I am an advocate of having to look at our budget realistically. And to the extent we have a very limited time to raise millage, you know, what some people have said, you know, the General Assembly has basically authorized you to do that. And there's other people that think that we're doing the worst thing in the world if we raise millage. But to the extent, the way I look at it is, because we often have these conversations at work, you miss a raise at work, it's gone forever. I mean, you never get that back. When we don't give our budget a raise, that money's missing forever. And I think one of the inevitabilities, and we could all, you know, sit here and say, we're not going to raise millage, we want y'all to go beat it out. But the long-term consequence of doing that is, to the extent the districts around us are raising their millage, which they're consistently doing. We've got some that, through all the lean years where we didn't raise millage, I mean, some years we raised millage, there were some we didn't. They consistently raised millage, and they layered and layered and layered. And what's going to eventually happen is they're going to start pushing the price of teachers up, which means, in addition to us, if we want to say, as noble as it sounds, that we're not going to raise millage, we're going to go find this money, the one reality is we're going to make a decision to reduce the quality of what we do if we start reducing the number of teachers. And if I don't see in today's world how you cannot raise millage until every year until the legislature changes the funding formula. And to the extent we want to be the example and not do it, and everybody around us is going to do it, then we're going to not be able to compete for teachers. So in addition to getting rid of teachers and the quality diminution that people are going to see and experience in their household with what their kids are learning in our schools, we're not going to be able to continue to hire the best teachers either. So it's going to compound. And the reality of where we are is you never go back and make this up. I mean, you never have the opportunity. I wish there were a different answer. I mean, back before Act 388, we could decide to raise or lower millage depending upon, you know, what our needs were. We don't have that flexibility. And so it's a very dangerous thing to say we can presuppose 5 years that we can do away without these layers of income. The one thing I would say, all the arguments we've always had about our fund balance, I'm not even going to try to repeat all those. They're all just as true as they were in years gone by as they are today. I mean, there's a reason the fund balance is where it's at today. You know, it's kind of like, let's shed our savings in the middle of an economic crisis. It's just going to make us more vulnerable to change. I remember very distinctly we used to have lines of people saying we were raising fund balance too much, when in reality we were doing what many districts do. We weren't alone in doing that. There were many districts that were accumulating their fund balance for a very good reason. If our funding went down, that money was there to help. And I sat on this board in 2008. I watched the money go away, and I watched us figure out how many teachers we would have laid off had we not had that fund balance to fill that gap. And until something changes, that fund balance is still needed, just like we made these arguments last year. We made them for probably since 2006. But it's gotten worse today with this adjustment. And, you know, I think it magnifies our problems, and I think the consequences are going to be magnified. And again, I wish I could say we don't need to raise millage. I don't see how we can do what we're entrusted to do without raising millage, given the cards that we're being dealt by the General Assembly right now.
Ms. Baumgartner.
I second it and I agree with what Mr. Turner has said, but some of the reasons I think a lot of times when we look at being efficient in our organizations, a lot of places tend to cut the boots on the ground, you know, rather than to look at the middle or look at some of the auxiliary. I do not support changing class size or anything else, but I think a lot of times if you start looking, and I think it's a good idea to, we talk about it. Now, Mr. Richardson's new, but I think a lot of times if we start looking and let's make it a goal rather than looking at the end of the year and hoping there's savings. I think it's a wise decision to do it that way. I think again, I see it oftentimes, in organizations where there's layers that you may not need, or, expenses, and a lot of times you'll be looking at ways. I think a lot of times I know we.
Mr. Turner.
Thank you. Mr. White, all these points are always well taken. And what I said in this motion was to look for a reduction in expenses of at least 1.5% of the proposed budget. But I ended it by saying, while maintaining the quality of success for which this district is known. And I wouldn't, if we do this, if the administration does this study, and the administration says, here's what we can cut, but here's what it means, then I think what we've done is we have fulfilled an obligation to our constituents to say that not only do we look at the revenue side in these budgets, we're also looking seriously at the expense side. And if we had to, and Ms. Baumgartner indicated that we're not necessarily, that cuts wouldn't necessarily occur in teachers or anything else. And I'm not proposing any particular cut. I just had a number out there to be an objective. And if it's as detrimental as Mr. White implies it would be, and he may be very well correct on that, then I don't think this board would want to impose any of those cuts. But I think having done that exercise, we have indicated to our constituents that we are doing, in light of everything else that we consider doing, we're also doing that. And I would point out, and I went back and looked at this just so I was certain, and I think this is correct. In 2012-13, we had the opportunity to raise millage 9.7 mills. We had a $1.4 million budgeted shortfall projected when Dr. Fullman was here, and we didn't raise taxes. We didn't raise millage that year. We missed that opportunity. Had we raised that millage back then, who knows where we might be. If you count 1.4 in 2012-13, 1.4 in 13-14, that's $2.8 million, pretty much covers this. Sort of argues against my point to not raise the millage here. But I'm torn between the two exercises, the increase, the review of our expenses, and fortunately, over the past, the time that I've been on this board, our fund balance, we've done well. And if Mr. Richardson is, if we're at zero this year, then we will begin the year with $32 million in our general fund balance, and we can absorb this. And although I'm not opposed to the concept of a millage increase, but I think that we can absorb this one. We haven't been having to absorb any in the past 3 years. We do have some earmarks for our general fund balance, and hopefully that we won't have to bother that, but we don't know. But those are my comments, but I do think that whatever we did, whatever the administration recommended, if the board felt that it was to the detriment of our students and our district success, then those would not be steps I think any board would recommend.
I want to step in on this. I certainly understand the sentiment of taking a look at our budget and reviewing what in the next year. Is there anything? I do know that Mr. Richardson, perhaps because not only because he's new, but also because he's very thorough, I'm told that he looked at every single position. It wasn't just groups, and he looked very thoroughly at this budget. And we are very lean, and where the majority of our budget is in personnel, as we know. It's already been stated that we have the nice part of having a low student-teacher ratio, which I believe that most of us understands really helps the quality of our education, and why School District 5 continues to be on top, and why our students, just like we saw the young man on the monitor before, and we watched all these students getting major scholarships when they graduated, that's not by accident. That is teacher involvement, and that's also programs. It's the specialists that we have in place to help it move forward. So I certainly would support a study next year. I can't support this amendment because I really do believe that it will be hurting our school district. What Mr. White mentioned about digging a hole, we would just be digging a hole. And there are certain things that are imposed on us, unfunded mandates, or just, I guess a mandate is where we do the step increases. It's wonderful to be able to give our teachers step increases, but we also have health and dental increase, and I think most people in this room understand that that's, I know that I've gotten health and dental increases. Retirement increases, we can't control that. And so that totals up to over $3 million, which we don't have a say-so in. That's pretty significant. You just don't make up $3 million. Then when the General Assembly changed the categorical funding, we are losing $2.1 million. So there you go, 5-point-something million dollars. That's big change. And it just goes to show we are not wasting money. So I would not want to see us dip further into our fund balance. We've proven time and time again that our excellent fund balance results in top-tier bond ratings. And what that means is a savings. So we always have to watch to see if this savings really benefits in the long run. And that's one thing that kind of bothers me sometimes about government. It's such a short-term solution for a long-term loss, and I believe that would be where we would be. And the fund balance also is a safety net. It protects the schools, it protects the students that we're educating, it protects our employees, so that if we have a natural catastrophe, then we have the funds to take care of that. And I think that's very important. I can go along, not in this amendment, for us to take some serious looks, and I think a lot of this, the board would have to make some serious changes in some of our policies if we wanted to decrease the budget by that amount of money. But I cannot support this amendment because I think it would be detrimental to our school district. Any other comments about the amendment? Yeah, Mr. White?
I would say to Mr. Turner, I've maybe because I've been on this board for a while that we've gone through those drills, and I think it's a totally perfect, legitimate question to ask about going through the expense side. But I've gone through that drill at times when it was excruciatingly detailed, and I've watched where different superintendents, different CFOs we'd start with a $5 million deficit, and after they beat everything out, and I mean, I've watched principals get up here, tears in their eyes, about having to relinquish a summer, school program for kids that were getting behind and things like that they were giving up and saying they could do without in order to help us fund our budget, and we still come up short by several $1 million in order to fund our balance. What I would suggest, and I just asked Mr. Richardson if this is possible, we can still go through the expenditure exercise. And if he wants to show this board, I mean, we don't have to waive the millage increase on the thought that we might come up with something. Yes, we might be able to cover it with fund balance, but we've given away that increase. And as you aptly described, had we done the full increase, I think a lot of that was a sensitivity to the economy and where people had been. Had we done that, we'd have an incremental layer of revenue right now that would soften this blow. But I think what you've described to us so far is we're going to be forced to go through that process no matter what. I mean, we got a $600,000 gap here that's going to get funded somewhere. And the only place to do that is through expense reductions if the state doesn't come back with more money. But I think if we support Mr. Gantt's original motion, the final millage, I think, numbers or be the fall. We could task the cabinet or Lynn to come back with their recommendations for us to look at prior to the final millage. Go ahead and prove it tonight, and if we find a recurring source of expenses we can chop, and that we can agree upon, then we can retract the millage. But I think it's putting. It'd be a noble thing to do, and there'll be people that will support y'all if you don't support this millage increase. But the people who are going to pay the price for this are the students who are in this organization for years to come under this current millage formula. So let's just go ahead and go through that expense exercise now. We can go through it again next year, but if there's not a clear identifiable path, then I think we're just creating more harm for this organization to meet its budgets in the future. And I go back to the point, every district around us, and I'd like to know how many districts around us are going to raise it by the max they're able to raise, because they're going to be competing for our teachers, and they're going to be paying salaries we're not going to be able to afford. And what we're going to be paying is less than a market salary in the future.
Dr. Hefner?
As your superintendent, I made the recommendation that the budget be supported by a millage increase, and I believe that's the correct course of action, certainly in the short term and in the long term. As Mr. Turner mentioned, if whatever revenue is not generated by the tax increase that is allowable, it's lost not just now, it's lost forever. And again, in our district, here in District 5, sometimes we've raised taxes, we've raised millage, sometimes we have not. And I think one of the reasons that we are unable to give our employees a raise, they're getting the step if they're required to get it. Those who have teaching certificates are required by law to get it. And it's our practice to give it to other categories of employees if they're eligible. But we're not able to give anything beyond the step, while many of our neighboring districts, I maybe shouldn't say many, why I know some of our neighboring districts are giving cost of living increases. We are unable to do that for our 2,500 employees, and I would like for us to be able to do that. And I do feel that because of the limitations of Act 388, that whatever revenue we don't generate, we not only don't generate it for next year, we don't generate it forever and ever. One other point I would point out, because I followed it in the 3.5 years that I've been here, is that I believe every year we've scheduled, we've listed that we think that we might have to dip into the fund balance to balance the budget, and I don't believe we have in the time we've been here. But 2 of the years we did not have to because we had unexpected revenue. 1 year we had a sizable increase in revenue. It may have been the year you spoke, or if not, it was the year in front of it or the year thereafter. I think it was the year, either that year or the year before, where we got a sizable increase of revenue on June 30th, the last day of the year, which bailed us out of having to dip into the fund balance. Again, I believe it's the prudent thing for us to do to position us long-term to provide, to continue to provide the quality of programs for which we're known in District 5, and to take care of our employees. Again, it's been a long haul since they've had any increase, and it's not happening this year, and it may not happen next year, but the reality is that we won't have a shot at it happening in the event that we pass up an opportunity to raise our millage. So that's my recommendation, because I believe it's the prudent thing to do. Again, I would also add, certainly clearly open to looking at every single expenditure we have. We need to do that regardless. We need to look at every single item that we are expending, and we'll have to go through that process regardless of which way the vote goes on this issue, on the budget this evening.
Thank you. Any more discussion on Mr. Turner's amendment? Mr. Turner.
Dr. Hevender, thank you. It's not easy to ever think about going against your experience and your approach to this. I too care about our teachers. I do care, as we all do, about this district being successful. This is not. My motion is not to take away from this district in any way, shape, or form. I think that we have an obligation every year to look at where we are, and I guess, and we've talked about the inability to give our employees a raise. And when you look at the cost of that, when you look at the cost of just as Mr. White, I think, asked Mr. Richardson, just the normal expenses that go up in this district, and where we are with the state and how they're adjusting the funding for districts, and our district is one of a few that I think has been affected negatively by that. And so I understand all these points. I'm not opposed to the budget. I'm not opposed to the step increase. I'm not opposed to all the hiring that we will be able to do passing this budget. I believe we can do it without having to raise the millage. And if, I certainly could be wrong that we will have to use all $2.1 million. If we didn't, in this budget, we still have to use $600,000. If it's exactly right, hopefully we would be able to do it without that. But we have to go on the recommendation of Mr. Richardson. We have to go on yours, Dr. Hefner, I understand. I just would suggest that on the basis of how solid our general fund balance is right now, with the fact that we haven't done anything about looking at these expenses for the next year, and I'm not next year, but that I would still believe we could do everything we wanted to do and absorb it with our general fund balance. Not pass the budget, but pass it without the millage increase.
Okay, thank you. I think we've had enough discussion on that. So we will be voting on Mr. Turner's amendment motion amendment, and it was to, I know it was to review our budget for programs for next year and no millage increase. So those in favor of Mr. Turner's motion, please raise your hand. That's 2. All against, please raise your hand. And that's 4. So that's 4-2, so the motion, the amendment fails. Now we're back on the original motion, which was to approve the agenda, and I'll accept any discussion on that. Mr. Gant.
Madam Chair, we've covered a lot of our budget in the discussion we've had, but I did want to offer for the record an item be put with our minutes, and that's our Exhibit C, which had and I want to point out that this proposed budget does not contain a cost of living increase. We've talked about that for district employees or members of the Board of Trustees. So I'd like to make this part of the record so it can be attached to the minutes. And I'll give you a clean copy of this from our. But Mr. Turner, your amendment and the discussion we had, I think, points out a dilemma we're in. We have the finest school district in the state of South Carolina, and it's a real tightrope that we walk. I think that we just assume sometimes that things will happen and fall in place. I think some of the things that have happened in the legislature have caused me to have more concern. If we had the flexibility we used to have when we had a catch-up provision when we were autonomous 100%. But I think Act 388 puts us in a bind year after year. And I appreciate where you were taking that, and I appreciate what Dr. Hefner said. I was sitting there thinking as we were going through that discussion. I believe that type look is going on very hard. I know that Mr. Richardson, you probably enjoyed tonight us calling you a new man, but you're new to this, but you've been in this a long time, and you looked at it a lot of different ways. But you're new to District 5 as an employee, but you're a resident here. But I know that you've looked at this in detail. I don't know when it's been looked at, the kind of detail that you've looked at it. And I know that Dr. Hefner is proud of every program we have, but I know that he looks at things with a reality check too. And I'm sure any program that's out there is subject to review constantly. I think that the staff does that. But I think one of the things that's going on now in this budget, and one of the things that happened in the legislature, is that they've changed the funding formula. And we've gotten a little bit of a buy this year. We've got a little bit of a hold harmless piece, but that goes away next year, Mr. Richardson, if I'm correct, on the items that I think some of the things we've talked about, the categorical funding and so forth that we've been so concerned about. But next year we'll be faced with some of those programs with high achieving students and some of those programs for at-risk school students. And I think we saw a prime example tonight of how our district works for all our students to be successful. But I think those pieces, Mr. Turner, scare me a lot, not knowing. I don't think we ever really know exactly what the legislature is going to do. But I know this funding formula is not necessarily a friend of funding for School District 5. It's going to help. I think it's going to help some people that need help, and I'm certainly for that. And I think the governor's program that she's backing is going to help people. But I think in the long range, and we always talk about vision. Our superintendent has a vision, and I know him to be a conservative person too. I think we need to, knowing the facts about the catch-up provisions not being there, knowing the critical pieces that Mr. White talks about, class size is probably one of the things that makes this district as successful as we really are. And I think our personnel to the person would tell us that. I appreciate the discussion we've had, but under this formula change and under the unknown and without a catch-up provision, I think we lose so much ground. And I think it would do us all well to watch other districts. We're concerned about District 5, but we need to look at what other districts do, because I think their provisions and their millage put them in a whole lot better position than we are. But based on that, I'm going to support this budget as recommended. And I appreciate the fact that I think we do need to take a look at some things, and I think that's going to happen. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Mr. White? Thank you.
If I could ask Mr. Richardson again, do we have any proposals on how we're going to make up if we fund this budget with the millage increase to 667,000? The deficit is still there.
Oh, I'm sorry, what was the question?
You showed us still, even with the millage increase, there's a deficit of $667,000. Have y'all made any recommendations on how we would make that up, or is that yet to be a conversation?
Well, we've had the conversation, I think, several times. We don't have any specific recommendations at this time, but like Dr. Hefner stated, we are committed to, as this year progresses, is to look at every line and every expenditure we have to see that we're, I guess, getting the bang for our buck where we need to, and if we're not, to hopefully redirect some of those monies to where we need them.
I would still like to, maybe before the millage, still leave Mr. Gantt's motion intact, but if there are recommendations that they can show us how we can, if we were to consider not raising this millage, how we would fund that out of our expenses. And I guess what I want to go through Mr. Turner's exercise of trying to press the expense question, and because I know for the public it looks like we're just sitting up here raising millage, but I can tell you, and you probably know this, and I think everybody on this board knows this, that these folks have already have gone through this process of scrubbing it, and not that everybody has to believe that y'all have done everything you can, but I certainly, my experience is that when it's brought up here, there's not a lot of easy answers left. But the other thing I go back to, so I would like to do that exercise that Mr. Turner is raising. I think it would be very good, and do it in a time that if we did see something, and I would sort of do the reverse of, or maybe it's not the reverse, but the caution has always been, don't fund reoccurring expenses out of fund balance has been the rule of thumb. And to the extent we let go of this millage increase, we look down, this step increase, again, I just want to repeat this for the record, the step increase is mandatory, absent the General Assembly waiving that, which they did shortly after 2008.
It's mandatory only for certified employees. It's not mandatory for support staff, but it is our practice to give it to all categories of employees.
So if we were to do it just for the mandatory amount, it would be...
It would be the bulk of that is what that's
so
for.
There's 3,100,000 in here now, so let's just say it's still 2 million.
Less than that, but you would be taking, you wouldn't be giving a step increase to a teacher aide who's, eligible to go from step 10 to step 11, or to any other employee that's able, a cafeteria worker who's moving up in years experience as well.
And my point though is, we have a projected shortfall of $2,168,000, with a few $100s there. We have the ability to raise millage by $1.5 million. Our step increase is $3 million. So even if you pull that back a little bit for the ones that are not mandatory, and just the mandatory ones, the millage increase won't even cover the step increase. And so what I'm suggesting to you is we would be funding basically our step increase out of our fund balance, but we would never have the ability in the future to fund that again unless we continue to eat up our fund balance. So we would be short forever the amount of that step increase, only to be confronted with another step increase next year. And that's the exercise we go through every year, is you look at this, and the biggest line item on here is our step increase. Yet if we pass on being able to fund $1.5 million of that with recurring revenue, we're going to have that recurring expense forever, but we're going to get another one on top of it next year. We're going to get another one on the top of the year after that, and the year after that. And it's just going to compound. And the other thing that's dangerous, I think, to even dip into our fund balance unless we've got clear answers of what we would actually do and vote as a board to do with our expenses, is we're being given a waiver on $870,000 of this formula funding, that $870?
It's just funding that we're able to carry forward that we're going to use next year. It's not a waiver, it's there. We have the money in the bank now, we're going to carry it forward to use next year.
But we won't get that opportunity next year.
That money will be gone.
So really, this deficit is going to be much larger than 2. It would really, with that one-time relief provision, or that one-time opportunity for the 870, we'd be looking at a $3 million deficit.
Correct.
So the millage increase would still only cover half of that. And so what I would suggest to you, Mr. Turner, we're going to be going down that road no matter what, because we're going to be confronted with expenses we can't fund. And, you know, but I would like to go through the exercise of how would we do it if we were going to do it, and decide it today and not just guess that we could end up in the right spot. But that doesn't change the motion. That's just what I'd like to do between now and the date the millage goes into the state.
Okay, Ms. Baumgartner?
Well, you know, the amendment was made and it failed, so we're now on the main motion. And I think we've discussed that. You know, I see both sides and I voted, but now we're at the main motion. And I do support the budget, you know, even though I think the amendment was good, I will be supporting the main budget because, you know, I can accept when I don't get my way and move on to what I think is best with the next decision. But, you know, let's talk about that amendment has failed, so let's move on.
Okay. Mr. Turner?
I need Mr. Richardson sitting 2 seats down from me so I can ask you questions. No, it's okay. Now that I can see, it's okay. Mr. White's points about step increases being mandatory and the way our district funds not only those we're required to, but anyone else eligible. And if we do that again next year, if it's mandated, it's $3 million. We opened up a new school, cost us $2 additional million. I guess, Ms. Richardson, my question is, and I'm glad we're having this discussion, and I hope somebody doesn't call for the question just yet, but is where do you see, if it's an axis or whatever, where do you see these 2 points? Because as I look at this, I see expenses doing this, I see revenue doing that, but I don't see them matching up even with tax increases. So the way I look at it, as Mr. White said, we're going to be faced with this, we're going to be faced with a problem that we've got to address anyway. But it seems like whether it's this year we take a hit on fund balance or it's next year and every year after that, because that's kind of what I see. I see that every year we're looking at a huge deficit, and tax increases only help us so much. And some of these surrounding districts, and I know a lot of people like to talk about student population and so forth, and whether that might be detrimental to us because, you know, we haven't experienced the growth. I think that's a matter of time. I think when the economy catches up, as it's doing, our states looks like it's going to have quite a boost of new business and putting people to work, and that should help the tax revenue. But I just see the gap continuing. And if we, and I asked you a question the other day, called you and asked you if there was a student population number that would make our budget balance, and I thought maybe you could just divide $2,100 into this budget and say, well, if we can go get X number of students, but you pointed out it doesn't work that way. But I see it just this divergent lines here that just don't cross. And do you believe that that we can raise millage this year and the year after and the year after that, whenever we have the opportunity, because I think that's basically what we're saying. We're saying that every chance we have to raise millage, we're going to do it. That's the only thing we can do. Until such time as either the legislature gives us more money or we cut expenses. And we can't control what they do, but we do have some say-so on the expense side. So do you see an answer other than a millage increase?
One-word answer? That's a good question. I do see things going exactly the way you're saying if the state doesn't do its part on trying to, I guess, fund education better than they have, or at least historically we have the last 8 or 10 years. I think eventually we have to do something. I mean, those two lines have got to intersect somewhere. I think it's up to us to make sure that we're looking at everything to ensure that we're spending the money the way we should to keep our programs in place, so we continue to pay our teachers and keep our academic excellence going. But in lieu of that, and the state not doing anything, and the fact that, if we were, had a tremendous growth spurt or something like that, that's one thing. But, in reality, that's not happening yet anyway. I don't really see any other way. But you're either going to cut on one side, or you're going to find a way to raise additional revenue. And unfortunately, millage increase is the only way we can do that at this time with the current situation that we have.
Excuse me. I believe we have discussed this enough, and it's time for a vote. The motion was to give the second and final reading of the proposed 2014-15 general fund budget as shown in Exhibit C. So all in favor of this, of approving the general fund budget, please raise your hands. All opposed? And that vote is 5-1, and the motion carries. I will now accept a motion to return to executive session since we were not able to quite finish. Mr. Gant.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we return to executive session and then come back out in public session.
Okay, is there a second? Ms. Bumgarner, all in favor of return to executive session? Okay, that passes 6-0, and we will come back after our executive session. Thank you.